Well, Tip O'Neill could have blamed Ronald Reagan, but he didn't. According to political rules, the Democratic Speaker of the House, Thomas P. O'Neill, could have blamed Republican President Ronald Reagan the last time an airliner crashed into the Potomac River. Tip O'Neill could have blamed Ronald Reagan, but he didn't, because the rules of common decency would not allow it. And Tip O'Neill's first impulse after the crash was not blame. It was sympathy. And so Democrats did not blame Republican President Ronald Reagan, even though in the single stupidest tough guy move by a president in domestic policy in the 1980s, Ronald Reagan, on August 5th, 1981, not quite 6 months into his presidency, fired 11,345 air traffic controllers in the middle of a labor dispute. It was the single biggest blow to the American aviation industry in its history to that point. And 5 months after, President Reagan fired 11,345 air traffic controllers. A 737 crashed into the Potomac with 79 people aboard. I was thinking about that crash in our live coverage at this hour last night, which became this network's first full live hour of coverage of last night's plane crash. I was thinking about that 1982 crash because I could remember the dramatic images of the 5 people who were pulled out of that river by civilians who jumped out of their cars and professional rescue teams who responded immediately. And I was desperately hoping to see scenes like that once again last night, as I knew people in Kansas, in Washington, and elsewhere in the country with loved ones on that airplane were hoping to see. They were hoping to see exactly that. And I knew that the worst words that you can hear about aviation accidents are mid-air collision. And since we knew almost immediately last night that it was a mid-air collision, hoping was hard to do. And so America woke up to the news that all 64 passengers and crew on the American Airlines flight from Wichita, Kansas, and the 3 crew members of that military helicopter in that collision were gone. No survivors. There has been a rush into the search for explanations, as there always is in situations like this. The best aviation investigators in the world are on the case, the National Transportation Safety Board. And those answers will be found. They always are. But we don't have those answers tonight. Donald Trump thought he knew the answers this morning when he blamed the gender or race of the people involved in the crash, because he was, as usual, completely indiscriminate in the way he threw his accusation around. No one knows whether he meant the gender and race of the helicopter crew or the gender and race of the airline crew or the gender and race of people in the air traffic control tower at Washington National Airport. And he somehow managed to blame Presidents Joe Biden and Barack Obama for the very existence of people of the wrong gender and the wrong race ever occupying such jobs. It is the first time in history that a president of the United States has assigned blame for an aviation accident on his own, immediately, based entirely on his own profoundly ignorant, prejudiced guess. Every previous president, in reacting to such events, such tragedies, has always begun with sympathy, including the only president who could have been blamed for an accidental plane crash and wasn't.
I'm going to digress for a moment from what I intended to say right here. A terrible tragedy took place in the capital city yesterday. The full extent of that tragedy still not yet known. But I only mention it because there are cynics who don't somehow believe in humanity anymore, and in projects such as the one that you're engaged in and the ones that I've been talking about, doubt whether people can carry them out. Well, what better example? Yesterday we saw a partnership, yes. The agencies and departments of government responsible in times of emergency were there. The heroism of the firemen in the icy waters is well known to all of us. But then there was just a bystander who saw a woman lose her grip on the line the helicopter was using to bring her to shore, and without hesitation he dived into the water. Lenny Skutnik. Nothing had picked him out as particularly to be a hero, but without hesitation, there he was, and he saved her life.
I was thinking about Lenny Skutnik at this desk at this hour last night, with the unforgettable image of him pulling Priscilla Tirado out of the Potomac in my memory and hoping to see something like that last night. Priscilla Tirado's husband and 2-month-old baby did not survive that crash. Ronald Reagan gave Lenny Skutnik a seat of honor 13 days later at the State of the Union address. Lenny Skutnik was the worst thing you can be in Donald Trump's Washington. He was a federal worker. He was an office assistant at the Congressional Budget Office. Lenny Skutnik retired from government service in 2010. He was, for a time, the most famous federal worker in America because of his heroism. 7 months after Lenny Skutnik became an American hero, the New York Times asked him if he would do it all again. He said, "The rescue I'd do again in a minute, but all the stuff that came after, the fame and all that, I could do without. If it ever happened again, I wish the cameras weren't there. The whole thing has been kind of blown out of proportion. I wish the cameras weren't there." There's nothing about Lenny Skutnik, not his humility, not his heroism, nothing about him that Donald Trump could ever understand. Some names, about 13 names, have been confirmed among the people lost in the crash. Samuel Lilly was the first officer on the American Airlines flight. He was inspired to fly by his father, an Army helicopter pilot, and was recently engaged to be married. Christine Lane was traveling with her son Spencer Lane, a member of the Skating Club of Boston, who was returning from the U.S. Figure Skating's National Development Camp in Wichita, Kansas. Alexander Kirsanov, the coach of 2 of the young skaters on the flight. Ian Epstein, a flight attendant on that flight from Wichita. Wendy Jo Schaefer, a wife and mother of 2 children, aged 3 and 1. Justina Beyer, 42 years old, who was on the flight with her daughter, Brielle Beyer, 12 years old. Jin Han was traveling with her daughter, Jinna Han, a member of the Skating Club of Boston, who was also returning from the U.S. Figure Skating's National Development Camp. Evgenia Shishkova, a coach with the Skating Club of Boston. Vadim Namov, a coach with the Skating Club of Boston. It wasn't the first time for the Skating Club of Boston to suffer such a tragedy. The director of the Skating Club of Boston, Doug Zegheib, said this earlier today.
To the best of our knowledge, 14 skaters returning home from the National Development Camp at Wichita, Kansas, put on by U.S. Figure Skating, were lost in the plane crash at Washington, D.C. Of those 14 skaters, 6 were from the Skating Club of Boston. 2 coaches, 2 teenage athletes, and the athletes' moms. Skating is a very close and tight-knit community. These kids and their parents, they're here at our facility in Norwood 6, sometimes 7 days a week. It's a close, tight bond, and I think for all of us, we have lost family. Sadly, this isn't the first time this club has experienced a tragedy like this. It's now a ways back, but in 1961, the entire world team of U.S. figure skating en route to the World Championships in Prague was lost in a plane crash in Belgium. Almost half of everybody on board that plane were from this club. It had long-reaching implications for the skating club and for the sport in this country, because when you lose coaches like this, you lose the future of the sport as well. It's been a long time in redeveloping it. And I personally feel that this club, the Skating Club of Boston, has just now, almost 60 years later, been coming out of the shadow of that 1961 crash. So this is particularly devastating.
There was something else that allowed us all to hope when we first heard the news last night, and that was the seemingly miraculous piloting of our first guest tonight, Captain Sully Sullenberger, when he brought a U.S. Air flight with 155 people on board to a successful crash landing on the Hudson River without any loss of life. We had a right to hope for miracles after seeing Captain Sullenberger do that. But that hope slipped away last night in the cold, dark water of the Potomac River.
Okay, so he played rugby and he ran track at West Point. He also did 2 master's degrees and got an MBA on top of that. Rifle platoon leader, scout platoon leader, then company executive officer, battalion commander, and then brigade commander in the 82nd Airborne. He helped lead the initial invasion of Baghdad in March 2003. He rolled his mechanized division straight from the Kuwait border overland right into the center of Baghdad, won a Silver Star for his valor in that operation. Then to Afghanistan, where he led the 10th Mountain Division. Then he became Chief of Staff at CENTCOM. Then he was the top U.S. commander in the Iraq War, in the whole war. He was actually the one who wound down U.S. forces at the end of the Iraq War. He was then named Vice Chief of Staff of the United States Army. Then he went back to CENTCOM, this time as commander of CENTCOM. Then he built and led the force that waged the war against ISIS. And then, and only then, was he considered for the really big job, Secretary of Defense. And that is the man who just left office as Secretary of Defense. The man who just arrived to take his job, he was a platoon leader in the National Guard, but now he too is Secretary of Defense. Both of them, obviously, honorable records of service. Not equivalent, though, I think you'd say, in terms of demonstrated leadership, experience, complex organizational management experience in particular. I mean, 4-star General Lloyd Austin had led like a whole war or 2. And he had been Chief of Staff and then Commander at CENTCOM just before being named as Defense Secretary. CENTCOM is the part of the U.S. military that has as its area of responsibility the Middle East and Central Asia and South Asia. That was what he was in charge of. I mean, that was his experience heading in to become Defense Secretary. That's who has just left as Defense Secretary. The guy who has just arrived, well, just before he was named as Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, he led 1/3 of the famous Curvy Couch on the Fox and Friends Fox News Channel weekend show. I have to say, it may be that he led 1/4 of the couch, not 1/3. I'm not totally sure how many hosts they have, but we could only find these pictures of him sharing with 2, so maybe he held down 1/3. That said, prior to his time at the Fox News Channel, Mr. Hegseth also ran into the ground two small right-wing veterans groups amid allegations, which he denies, of wild financial mismanagement, nepotism, sexual harassment, public drunkenness, and even drinking on the job. For one of those organizations, an independent forensic accountant found evidence of gross financial mismanagement while Pete Hegseth was administering that organization. And so then they made him Secretary of Defense. Two guys, same job. And, you know, maybe he got the job based on merit and demonstrated capability. Or maybe it was some other factor. I don't know. Your call. Last night's horrific plane crash at Reagan National Airport in Washington, D.C. was caused by the collision of an American Airlines regional jet carrying 64 people in a flight from Wichita, Kansas. It collided with a U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopter that was carrying 3 crew members. And tragically, there appear to have been no survivors of the crash on either aircraft. And in the aftermath of this terrible incident, newly confirmed Trump administration Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth screwed up. When a service member, any service member, is killed while in service, there is a strict policy at the Pentagon. The Defense Department gives no information about any service member who has been killed until at least 24 hours has elapsed since their death. They do not give their rank, their name. They do not give their age. They do not give their rank. They give no information about the service member in question. And the reason they do that is because the Defense Department, sadly, but also obviously, has to deal with delivering terrible news like that way more than any other element of our government does. And so they very much know how to do it, and they have very strict rules about it. They are irreducibly strict, for example, about that 24-hour rule, specifically so they can be absolutely sure that the next of kin have been notified and have had time to absorb the information before any public announcement is made about the death of a particular service member. So that's the rule. Hard and fast. No names, no ages, no ranks, nothing for 24 hours. And that's not just for service members killed in combat. It's for any service member killed while in service, whether it's a health incident or an accident or a crime or a tragic plane crash, right? That's the rule. Nothing for 24 hours. And it's a rule for good reason, for reasons of bare human decency, but also just competence at dealing with something very difficult. Nevertheless, Pete Hegseth today just went to the White House and blurted out that it was a captain and a staff sergeant and a chief warrant officer who all died. He just blurted it out this morning. And I don't know. Maybe he is not cut out for this job. Maybe he was hired for some reason other than merit, experience, temperament, character. I don't know. Maybe there was something else about him. I don't know. But that is how it's going so far.
Joining me now is Congresswoman Sharice Davids of Kansas, where the flight originated. She's a member of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee and the Aviation Subcommittee. Also joining me is retired Marine Lieutenant Colonel Amy McGrath, founder of the Democratic Majority Action PAC. Thank you both for us to be here. Representative Davis, I want to start with you and let you talk about your community and how they are handling this, and also how you feel about the President of the United States weighing in and giving his own diagnosis of this crash rather than waiting for the NTSB.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would say is that this is so heartbreaking, and as more details emerge, this is heartbreaking for. Kansas is a small state, and we all are going to feel the effects of this. Our hearts are breaking for the families, and also have so much appreciation and gratitude for the first responders. Right now, we're in a situation where we do not have the facts of what exactly happened here, and the Transportation Safety Board, the Pentagon, the FAA, all of these officials are working together to do what they're trained to do, which is to investigate the causes of this tragedy. And I believe that it is, it's not only reckless, but irresponsible for any federal official, whether it be the president, a secretary, or anyone else, a member of Congress, to try to comment on what may have been the cause until the NTSB concludes their investigation.
Yeah.
And it actually...
Go ahead.
It's a matter too, of respecting the people who have been impacted directly by this. You know, the families deserve dignity and respect, and for there to be a thorough investigation.
Let me ask you this, because we do know some things. There are some facts on the ground. We know that there's normally 2 people in that control tower. You know, obviously there is a shortage of people in that control tower. But these are the things we know for a fact. On January 20th, Donald Trump's FAA director resigned under pressure from Elon Musk. We know that same day, this was on Inauguration Day, Donald Trump froze air traffic controller hiring, along with all federal hiring. The Aviation Safety Advisory Committee was disbanded on January 22nd. The buyout demand, which is not really a buyout, trying to get people to resign in exchange for some vague promises to existing employees, went out January 28th. And on January 29th, the very next day, we had this crash. And Donald Trump tried to blame President Biden, but here's the number of deadly airplane crashes that took place and fatalities under President Biden. The answer is none. There were none. He also tried to blame President Obama. There was one in February of 2009. So we know that 9-10 days into his administration, after he changed the nature of employment at the agencies that matter, this happened. As a member of Congress, do you feel that this is something that actually needs to be looked into a bit further?
Look, at this stage right now, what I can tell you is that I want to make sure that as a member of Congress and someone who sits on the aviation subcommittee, who has I've unfortunately had to perform oversight duties because of the tragedies that happened with the Boeing MAX in my first 2 years of Congress. The most important thing for us as members of Congress to do is to let the NTSB and the investigators conclude their investigation so that we can really take stock of what happened and make sure that we're appropriately addressing these issues. And again, I think it is irresponsible for any federal officials, the president included, to try to come up with off the cuff what reasons might exist.
Yeah. Let me go to you, Amy McGrath, because you've actually, this is something that you're very familiar with. Obviously, these military choppers and et cetera, and having served yourself. I want to play for you Peter Alexander, NBC's Peter Alexander, calling Trump out on the idea that diversity and inclusivity caused this crash. We don't have it. Okay. Well, Peter Alexander asked him that he had cited an FAA guidance, but the implications that the policy is new or that it stemmed from efforts that began under President Biden or the Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. He says it's demonstrably false. And he asks, and Donald Trump says, no, it's not false. And he claims that he changed the guidance that was on the FAA website that existed when President Obama established it in 2013. But we actually, our producer here, pulled the screenshot of what that guidance was during Trump's entire first administration. And it said the following: a key focus for the FAA's Office of Civil Rights is to identify specific opportunities for people with targeted disabilities, empower them and facilitate their entry into a more diverse and inclusive workforce. And as indicated, this is a screen grab showing that he didn't change anything. The targeted disabilities under Trump included hearing, vision, missing extremities, partial paralysis, complete paralysis, epilepsy, severe intellectual disability, psychiatric disability, dwarfism, the same things that he called out for Biden's FAA. Can you just speak to this idea that Donald Trump is trying to blame diversity and inclusion when he also practiced it as president?
Well, here's what I can say. Look, the standards for being an air traffic controller or for being a pilot in the United States of America are very, very high. They were high under President Obama. They were high under President Trump. They were high under President Biden, and they're high today. And so this idea that the current president would infer that DEI or that really anyone at this point, Joy, is to blame for this tragic mishap. I mean, we're still pulling bodies out of the river. Think about that. An investigation will happen. It will take probably a month, maybe more. There's a number of things that could have happened. This is a very busy airspace. Military flying is also very dangerous. We have the potential for pilots to have been on night vision goggles. There's lots of things. But you know what? Anybody making blame right now is wrong, it's irresponsible, and it's particularly shameful for the President of the United States to make it.
It seems that he's listening to Charlie Kirk, right? Charlie Kirk back in 2024 said that when he sees a black pilot, he wonders if they're even qualified at all. Donald Trump came out, essentially tried to blame diversity for this and throw it on their favorite, DEI, which is their favorite little, thing to beat all the time. But the reality is the people that he's put in place could be very clearly said to be not qualified. No offense to Sean Duffy. I'm sure he was really great on The Real World. I'm not sure what qualifies him to lead the FAA. I'm not sure what qualifies Pete Hegseth to lead the DOD, and yet that we're expected to believe they are qualified. Wouldn't it, in a sense, be offensive to other Black Hawk, pilots if Donald Trump is trying to tell them he knows better what this pilot should have done, and he knows better whether or not a diverse person has, the right to fly a Black Hawk or a plane?
Well, Donald Trump knows about as much as about airspace and aviation as he does about bleach and COVID. OK, he's not somebody that we should be listening to in that manner. And it is offensive. I will say that, aviation in general, and people need to know this, becoming a pilot or an air traffic controller, there are very objective standards for that. The aircraft does not know if you're a man or a woman. The simulator does not know if you're a man or a woman. You can either put the plane, land it or not. You either know the emergency procedures or not. You either are able to fly that thing within the regulations or not. And so to me, this whole idea about, minorities or diversity being a problem in aviation, this is probably of all of the career paths you can choose, the one that has the most objective standards to qualify.
Yeah, indeed. I'm going to give J.D. Vance the last word. He said when you don't have the best standards in who you're hiring, it means on the one hand, you're not getting the best people in government, but on the other hand, it puts stresses on the people who are already there. I think he doesn't understand how much that applies to his own administration, fellow members of his administration. Congresswoman Sharice Davids, that's me saying that, not you both. Congresswoman Sharice Davids and Amy McGrath, thank you both.
Have you referred to the media as the most powerful enemy of the United States that they have ever seen? Is that right?
Again, you're reading a quote.
We collectively joined forces to take on the most powerful enemy that the United States has ever seen. And no, it's not Washington, D.C., it's the mainstream media.
You said we're going to come after the people in the media who lied about American citizens, who helped Joe Biden rig the elections. We're going to come after you, whether it's criminally or civilly. Is that something you said?
That's a partial statement of what I said.
We will go out and find the conspirators, not just in government, but in the media. Yes, we're going to come after the people in the media who lied about American citizens, who helped Joe Biden rig presidential elections. We're going to come after you. Whether it's criminally or civilly, we'll figure that out. But yeah, we're putting you all on notice.
You also said you would put the entire fake news mafia press corps on your list. Is that correct? Is that what you said?
I don't have that in front of me.
It sounds cool. In the fake news mafia, we have to hunt down the people in the fake news media who made the deep state a reality.
Chrissy Kesh Patel is going to hunt down the media. RFK is putting live birds in a blender, described as a predator by his cousin Caroline. Kristi Noem shot her frisky puppy in the face. These are people in charge of law enforcement functions in the government. What is the disconnect in Republicans being all in here?
they're just cowards. I mean, you have a political party that is not a political party. It's a cult, and it's a cult of personality of one man, Donald Trump. He selected these individuals. I think if you had asked many of these members of Congress, these would not be their choices for these very important positions. But because Donald Trump selected them and they're cowards and they're afraid for their own positions and to make sure that they don't infuriate Donald Trump, they go along. I mean, watching this hearing today, watching Kash Patel, it was like watching somebody cosplay as a legitimate nominee for be an FBI director. And then when you see the other clips of the things that he said, you know, it's just they're two different people who we saw today in a suit saying that he backs, you know, the FBI and that he's somebody who wouldn't weaponize government when we know he has made statement after statement about going after the media, going after political enemies. There's a list. Like, you know, you can't back away from the things that you've said. And this idea that we're just trying to whitewash his whole history, the whole thing just felt like such a farce to me.
Well, we're not whitewashing it. I guess what I don't understand is there are people like John Cornyn who understand why the FBI matters. I accept that elections have consequences. Trump can put whoever he wants. But the idea of Republicans like John Cornyn or John Thune or people who understand what the FBI is, who understand that under Chris Wray, who was Chris Christie's defense lawyer, who then became Donald Trump's handpicked FBI director. It was a rule of law agency. Bill Barr, you couldn't get between Bill Barr and a camera when he was talking about how screwed Donald Trump was in Mar-a-Lago. What has happened? I guess, is it Trump winning? I mean, what has happened that these people don't think the FBI should function as a law enforcement agency respected around the world?
I thought it was really interesting when there were questions posed to Kash Patel about if Donald Trump were to issue an order to investigate Chris Wray, to investigate Bill Barr. Again, these were people that were appointed by Donald Trump. These are people that the Republicans revere. Whether or not, you know, Kash Patel would obey that order, he refused to say. You know, he refused to say, no, of course we won't investigate those people. I mean, that should have been a pretty simple question. Like, these aren't gotcha questions. You know, will you not investigate people that again, there seems to be bipartisan agreement have done nothing wrong? And he wouldn't say it. So that kind of tells you everything. The fact that that's not ringing the alarm bells for Republicans is a testament to, I think, the sad state of our politics.
Frank Figliuzzi, is it ringing alarm bells inside the FBI?
Literally, as we speak, there are very senior people in senior positions in the FBI headquarters building who are being told to either resign or retire or accept a demotion. There are also field commanders that are affiliated with the Mar-a-Lago case or other Trump-related cases who are being encouraged to do the same. So we're already seeing this play out. And I have to wonder if these Republican senators who seem to all be on board for Patel are going to regret their decision when they one day get sideways with the president and the president sicks Kash Patel and the FBI on them. They are going to regret their decision because that's the kind of man that Kash Patel is. The other thing that worries me greatly right now is mission creep at the FBI. As we speak, there are FBI agents on the streets with ICE and Border Patrol. And they're doing things that aren't anywhere near the FBI mission. And the problem with that is there are certain authorities that Border Patrol and ICE have that the FBI simply does not have. There are certain warrantless authorities that govern their work. And so already today, we're getting the FBI involved in things that are dangerous for them as an organization and what's not getting done when they're out on the street rounding up migrants. That's where we are.
Three of the most controversial, most ostentatiously unqualified, sort of the most trolling choices Trump has made for his cabinet, three of them all had hearings on the same day at the same time today. At the first of his two confirmation hearings yesterday, Trump's health secretary nominee, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., seemed to not understand what Medicaid is, even though Medicaid insures roughly a fifth of all Americans and would be among the 13 federal health agencies he would be overseeing if he was confirmed. He also suggested that Americans have so many babies that most of the humans born on Earth in any given year are babies that are born in the United States. The United States, for the record, has roughly 4% of the Earth's population, so I don't know. how'd things go at Mr. Kennedy's second hearing today.
You said the following, and I quote, "We should not be giving black people the same vaccine schedule that's given to whites because their immune system is better than ours." Can you please explain what you meant?
There's a series of studies, I think most of them by Poland, that show that to particular antigens that blacks have a much stronger reaction. There's differences in reaction to different products by different races.
So I have 17 seconds left. Let me just ask you then. So what different vaccine schedule would you say I should have received? What different vaccine schedule should I have received?
I mean, the Poland article suggests that blacks need fewer antigens.
A series of studies, I think most of them by Poland, that led to some people thinking that maybe Mr. Kennedy was talking to the country of Poland, studies from Poland. In fact, he seems to have been referring to one single study by a Dr. Poland, Gregory Poland, MD. In fact, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. made a whole anti-vaccine film targeting black people using that one study from Dr. Poland. But poor Dr. Poland, for years, has been telling anybody who will listen that RFK Jr. is completely, totally wrong about his work. Dr. Poland says RFK is wildly misrepresenting his research. Dr. Poland says, quote, "We do not have a study that shows African Americans need half the vaccine dose. We do not have a study that shows African American children are being overdosed. And please, for the love of God, stop citing my work in your weird anti-vaccine race science theories. Get my name out of your mouth." Senator Alsobrooks told Robert F. Kennedy Jr. today that his assertions are dangerous, that she'll be voting against his nomination.
Major theme you can see Republicans converging on from the Trump White House, the confirmation hearings on Capitol Hill, is to blame everything they can on diversity initiatives and just basic pluralism in the federal government, invoking them to take a sledgehammer to the parts of government that everyday Americans depend on. Senator Reverend Raphael Warnock is a Democrat of Georgia. He sits on the Senate Finance Committee, which got to ask questions of Health and Human Services nominee RFK Jr. yesterday, and he joins me now. Senator, I want to just start with your reaction, sort of in toto, to what seems to be the most pressing and urgent single-minded focus of the new administration, which is going after the entirety of the federal government, whether in blocking grants or hiring practices, to root out what they say is Marxism and anti-discrimination efforts.
Yeah, let me be very clear what we're dealing with. This is the administrative expression of January 6th. On January 6th, it was clear that in a violent way, they were coming after the Republic, coming after the nonviolent transfer of power, including a kind of brutality visited upon police officers, the effort to disenfranchise the votes of millions of Americans. And that spirit of January 6th continues, which is why on his very first day in office, Donald Trump pardoned all of these violent insurrectionists. And then he proceeds with the same kind of lawlessness through executive orders, whether that's basically saying that the laws that we've already passed to provide support for various efforts all across our country, from health care to child care to helping folk with jobs, somehow that doesn't matter. And it has to come back through the putative monarch, I guess, to sending out this awful memo asking that our federal workers just resign. This is an assault on the American Republic and the attempt to replace it with their dystopian vision of the future, and we've got to fight back.
You mentioned the sort of attempts to kind of reroute funding. I want to ask you about some of these nominees, but I want to just stay on that for a second. They issued this memo at OMB. It seemed flatly illegal and unconstitutional. It was maybe going to lose in court. They then rescinded it after political blowback. The press secretary said, no, we're actually still freezing all this funding. And I have to say, it's just not clear what the status is. And as a U.S. senator, I know I've talked to politicians and representatives who are getting calls and talking to people. Is it clear to you what the status is? Which is to say, Is money flowing in the needed way it has to, or is it still stalled?
It's clear what Donald Trump is up to because we've seen this movie before. It is the OMB memo that was rescinded. The executive order was not rescinded. Let's be clear, Donald Trump is going to try this again. He's going to come after all of these programs, I think in part because they are looking to pull as much money as they can away from working class Americans so they can pass this huge tax cut for the wealthiest of Americans. They're trying to reshape government according to the vision of Project 2025, which he denied over and over again, but we are literally seeing it being played out before our very eyes.
You had an opportunity in yesterday's hearing, the first of two, with to question RFK Jr., who's been nominated to head HHS. You asked him about past statements where he compared the work of the CDC to work in Nazi death camps and abuse in the Catholic Church. He denied it. You then read him the transcript. Was there anything that happened yesterday or today that would persuade you this is a person that should be entrusted with overseeing an enormous part of the American healthcare system?
I was very concerned going into the hearing. I had met with Mr. Kennedy in my office some days before that. And I walked away yesterday, if it's possible, even more concerned about what I heard and what we all saw. Mr. Kennedy apparently thinks that the CDC, which I proudly represent, some 10,000 employees down in Georgia, standing up for our health care every single day. Mr. Kennedy obviously thinks that the CDC is dangerous. I think that he's demonstrated that he is a hazard to our health. And I hope that there'll be just enough of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to stop him. Because let's be very clear, it's Republicans who have to stop this. Even if you have every single Democrat vote no on this nominee, it's Republicans who will have to decide if they're going to choose country over party, choose the people that they were sent to represent over partisan politics. They failed that test miserably when it came to Pete Hegseth, even as they are attacking diversity, equity, and inclusion. I want to know what qualifies Robert Kennedy to be the chief public health officer of the United States of America. What qualifies the likes of Pete Hegseth to be the leader at the Pentagon? This is a disturbing moment in our country.
Senator Reverend Raphael Warnock of Georgia, thank you for your time tonight.
Great to be with you.